The following story was verified, and I spoke to the victim and verified the documents and her story. The victim of this story would like to use only her first name due to privacy and safety. My name is Shirley, and what I hope you take away from my story is that scammers can really manipulate you when you're in a bad place. The pandemic caused my husband and I to separate, and we're now divorced. I don't blame the pandemic totally, but it was the straw that broke the camel's back. We were married for 25 years, and the marriage was filled with physical and mental abuse and controlling abuse on his part. We were both laid off from work in April of 2020. The abuse had always been bad. He called me names, made fun of my weight, and often told me I disgusted him. We had one son together who is now grown and out on his own. In 25 years of marriage, my husband broke me down to the point I believed him when he said that I was a useless human being. My self-esteem was at zero. The bruises and abuse physically were bad, but mentally I never healed. When he finally reached wanting a divorce, I was actually crushed, as he was all I knew. We decided to live in the same house during the remainder of the pandemic and then filed for divorce when the courts were open again. He lived upstairs and I took the guest room downstairs in our house. So yes, we were still married, but the marriage was done. It had been done for a long time. The only thing holding us back was the paperwork being filed due to the pandemic. Nothing more. As isolation grew, my husband was never downstairs. He lived in the upstairs part of the house and would stay there. I think I'd ran into him a handful of times in the kitchen, where he would make snarky comments about my weight before going back upstairs to his little cave. Honestly, I became lonely. Without the ability to have friends over, not that I had many, or work to keep my brain busy, I felt like I was dying inside from loneliness. I found myself online, on my phone now more than ever. I had Facebook and always played slot games, casino games, but for some reason I went on a page called Zeusk on Facebook. There were posts by the page showing success stories of couples meeting via the internet and the Zeusk app and finding love. I made a comment on a photo of a couple that met online, and how the woman in the photo said she met the kindest, most gentle man ever, and he proposed. I wrote something under the photo about how I wished them the best and hoped for the same kind of love someday. I received a reply from a man named Matthew, who said he was hoping for the same, and he said he thought my profile picture was beautiful, and he asked if it would be okay if he sent me a friend request. I don't know what possessed me other than being lonely, but I accepted his offer, and he went ahead and sent me a friend request. He jumped into my messenger right away and introduced himself. He said he was divorced and that his wife had cheated on him with his best friend and he found them in bed together. He said it killed him as he was always so kind and loving to her and treated her with such respect. I then told him about my situation. I was honest and said I'm still married, but we're divorcing soon as the courts are open again after the pandemic, and will contact an attorney and deal with the divorce. I told Matthew about his abuse. I was honest about everything, and I told him my husband both physically and mentally abused me for years. Matthew said my husband's not a real man, and that if I was his woman, he would treat me like a queen. He said his wife was into drugs and alcohol, and would get drunk and sleep with other men, and his best friend cheated with her and spent all of his money. He said he was in the army and every time he was deployed his wife would sleep with other men and use his bank account to pay for drugs and parties. I felt sad for him as he was a good-looking man. He told me so many sweet words within our first few minutes of chat, more than my husband told me in 25 years of marriage. He said he was born in Greece, but after his parents were killed in a car accident, he was forced to move to North Carolina and live with his uncle. When he was 18, his uncle kicked him out of the house, so he joined the military and has been in ever since. He said he was 50 years old. I was 46 at the time. He kept saying, age is just a number. But I told him, we're only 4 years apart. That's not a big deal. But he kept getting caught up on how he hoped his age didn't bother me. I found that odd, but maybe that was because he was self-conscious of turning the big 5-0. We texted on Messenger for about an hour. He told me he was deployed to Kabul, but was getting a transfer to South Korea for 1 year very soon, but due to the pandemic, he was unsure of when. He told me he had a daughter who was in college, but he never got to see her very often because she sided with her mother and not him. I'm in a similar situation with my son, as he sides with his father and has sadly grown up to be just like him. We don't talk often, only at holidays and birthdays, and our relationship is pretty strained. Matthew asked me if we could exchange some photos. My profile picture was of me, but I had on big sunglasses and a hat, and it was taken at the beach last year. I hated my photos, so I sent Matthew another beach picture of me covered up in a pool chair with sunglasses and a hat. He sent me a couple photos of himself in a military uniform, and one of him laying on a couch where he said was at his home. He asked for more pictures of me. In fact, he was very pushy, saying, "Send me more. I want to see your beautiful face. I want more pictures." I felt bad, as I'd gained a lot of weight, and have always been a bit heavy. I sent him a few pictures of me that were taken at work before the pandemic, and one of me in my house, a selfie. He sent stickers of hearts and roses and cartoons with love stickers for eyes, saying I was the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen. I sat there in shock, as it's something I've not heard before. He said I was like a beautiful angel, a queen. I cheered up, because a man had never made me feel this way or said these things to me, and certainly not my husband, who always called me a fat pig. Matthew asked for my phone number and asked if I'm on WhatsApp or Hangouts. I'd never heard of either. I was not into apps unless they were casino apps for games or word search game apps. He asked me to download WhatsApp so we could keep in touch better while he's deployed. I downloaded it and we connected there. We chatted for a while before I had to go. I decided to make dinner that night, and my husband had ordered himself a pizza. I was smiling and in a good mood after talking to Matthew. My husband told me I can't have any of his pizza because I'm big enough, and he asked me why I was smiling. I didn't tell him about Matthew, I just told him I want to smile. He told me pigs snort, they don't smile. I went back to my bedroom and cried. As I was crying, my phone binged, and it was Matthew. He sent me a few YouTube songs, and he said he wanted me to listen. They were love songs, and he said he was thinking of me. It made me feel a lot better, and as the days went on, we chatted on WhatsApp and texted back and forth. He asked me what work I did. I explained to him about the pandemic and how I just was laid off from my job. I was collecting unemployment, as was my husband. He asked me if my husband and I slept together. I told him no, we live in separate lives, in the same home. Matthew asked me if I thought we could be together and try for a relationship. At first I told him that I need to get my divorce before starting a relationship. He accepted this, but kept talking and romancing me. Honestly, he lifted me from my depression and made me feel loved. He would send roses and virtual cards online, love songs, texted me every morning, afternoon, and night. He told me it's rough where he's deployed and that I had gotten him through some bad times. I felt useful for once. I was making a difference in this man's life. As the weeks went on, we talked. My husband became more stressed out due to the pandemic and lack of work. Yes, some bills piled up, but once his unemployment back pay was paid out, we actually jointly had a bank account and all the bills were getting paid, and we were able to save some money. But during this stressful time, though, of waiting for his back unemployment to pay out, my husband became more verbally abusive, calling me names, telling me once we divorce he will have loads of women throwing themselves at him because he works out and takes care of himself. Yes, my husband's always been a fitness man. He went jogging and worked out. He didn't look his age of 53, and he kept himself in good shape, but his heart was ugly. He told me he couldn't wait to divorce me, and that I will be forever alone because no man would want a fat pig like me. But I knew things were changing because his words didn't hurt me anymore. They didn't hurt me because I had Matthew. I told Matthew what my husband was saying to me, and he would become angry, telling me that I'm a beautiful queen and that he wants to marry me one day. I told him I wasn't wanting to be married again, but as time went on, I fell in love with Matthew, his sweet words, and when my husband would scream at me, throw something at me, or call me a pig, I would text Matthew and he would make me feel like a beautiful princess. It was an emotional battle. Matthew one night called me. He said he'd been afraid to call me when my husband was home, and I explained to him again we live separate lives. But one night when my husband was out shopping, Matthew called. When I answered, he said something to me like, "Hi, my queen," or "Hi, my baby." I can't recall, but it was something sweet and kind. His voice was unusual, though. He sounded younger than the age he said he was, and he had a very heavy accent. He told me he was from growing up in Greece, and that his mother was originally from Denmark and his father was Swedish. So it was a mix of their accents and being from Greece originally that created this odd accent. Admittedly, at times I had a hard time understanding him, but his sweet words always came through. We talked on the phone for a while. I tried to video call, but he said that he couldn't talk right now on video due to being in a deployment zone. He said he would call me on video during his government-appointed break time. Late that night, I got a video call from Matthew. It was a very choppy video, but he was the man in the video, which matched his pictures. But the video froze several times as he tried to speak, so his lips didn't go with the video, and it was only for about 30 seconds. He apologized, but the connection is poor in the deployment area. I told him I understood and was happy just to hear his voice and see him on video, but we could text, whatever worked for him. We texted and voice chatted all night that night. He told me I was his angel, and I cried and cried. Late in the night, he asked me for a nude photo. I couldn't do it as I felt very ugly and fat. So I took a photo of my breast and told him that's all I'm willing to do for right now. He then sent me a photo of his private area, not a full picture of his face, just his pants area. He said I was making him feel excited. I was shocked and turned red. I didn't think I could make a man feel that way. I truly felt ugly at most times. We had some adult phone time that night, and I let him listen to me. I was embarrassed, but it was thrilling. Yes, we had X-rated phone chat. He told me he loved me and he wants to marry me when he gets home from deployment. By this time, I was fully in love with him, and I told him yes, I would marry him, but I need to complete my divorce first, and I really didn't know how long it would take. He said he would wait forever as he knows I am his soulmate. I fell more and more in love. We would talk nearly day and night, when he could. He said he was doing some dangerous missions and I would pray for him. He told me his phone time was running low, as over in Afghanistan during deployment, the phone airtime costs 4 times as much and eats up his cards. He asked me if I'd be able to get him a few iTunes cards. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to talk. I didn't know what iTunes cards were or what they did, and I never gave it any thought. I've never bought one before. Matthew explained that they are used for military phones to keep them connected to loved ones. He asked if I could pick a few up, and the next day I went out shopping, and I did. I bought 2 $100 iTunes cards, and I bought myself a silky nightie. I felt very attracted to this man. I was going to surprise him and send him photos of myself with the nightie on, and then take it off and send some nude pictures. I wanted to excite him like he said I did. I gave him the iTunes card numbers and sent a bunch of pictures of me in the nightie. He loved them and thanked me. He said his bank account is frozen due to deployment because his ex-wife had used his bank for fraud, so he was unable to use it until he could get home and verify in person at the bank with his ID. He said he was going to have his ex-wife thrown in jail for bank fraud. He mentioned to me it's hard not having a working bank account as he gets paychecks from the military and can't deposit them. They are holding them for him. I told him that's terrible, but I'll always be here for him. We talked all night. I started to wake up later in the mornings as we would talk so late at night, as it was daytime in Afghanistan and he called me on his breaks from his missions, as they did a lot of the missions at night. When I woke up early noon one day, my husband was downstairs getting ready to go shopping. I asked him if he would pick a few things up for me, which he then abused me, telling me that pigs can eat slop, and no man would want me unless I lose weight and stop looking so ugly. I actually laughed at him instead of crying. I gathered myself, got dressed, and went to the store myself. I was on cloud nine. I didn't care anymore what my husband said or did to me. I knew Matthew loved me. I would pick up iTunes cards each time I went out. I wanted to treat my new man to the comforts of home without being home with me. I wanted us to stay in constant contact. I picked up a bunch of treats, cookies, candy, jerky, socks, and clothing. I wanted to put a care box together for Matthew. I knew troops overseas were able to get care packages. I boxed it up, and that night I asked Matthew for his military mailing address. He told me he's in special forces. They are not allowed to directly receive packages due to the risks of terrorism. But if I wanted to send a package, I could mail it to a military agent in New York who would then send it to the base. Due to security reasons, he couldn't reveal where he was at and which base in Afghanistan, and only the military agent could know this. He was so thankful. He asked me if I'd be willing to put some money into the box as they can exchange it. He said the military agent in New York would mail the box to him as he has me listed as his wife on his military approval list. He showed me a document with my name on it, listing me as his wife. I was absolutely touched, shocked, and began to cry that I meant so much to this man. He asked me if I could send $1,000 in cash in the box. I was a bit worried about it, but then figured it's going to a military agent. It'll be safe. I went to the bank the next day and took out $1,000 from my husband and I's joint account and stuffed it into the package inside a pair of socks I bought for him. The money came from both partly my and my husband's savings. It was mostly my savings, though, and I wanted to make Matthew happy. The box went to a woman named Tanya who lived in upstate New York. I had to put her name on the box with the word Military Agent 5568 under the name, and then her address. I put Matthew's military ID name and information inside the box. Matthew had sent me his military ID card early on in our chat to show me he's for real. I also sent him my driver's license so we could establish trust with each other right away. Weeks went on and I kept sending iTunes cards in our chat. We would chat every night, and several times a week he would ask me for sexual pictures as well as regular ones. I felt more confident as time went on, so I'd send him more and more provocative pictures. He told me he's applying for a military marriage license. He wanted us to get engaged and asked me to marry him. I said yes, and a week later a ring came in the mail addressed to me. I remember bawling from happiness. All the bad around me faded when Matthew came into my life. He sent me the paperwork to fill out for the marriage license so he could get it applied for, as it might take weeks due to the pandemic, and I reminded him I'm still married. He said that's okay, and it's just an application for marriage. It's an intent to marry. He said he wants to put me as his beneficiary as well in the event something happens to him while in the war zone, which I didn't want to think about him being hurt or losing him ever. He needed a copy of my social security card. He already had my driver's license, and he needed a copy of my bank account with routing number so he could verify the benefits. In the event he dies, I would get his military insurance, which was $500,000. He sent me all the documents, and I was so happy. He said he received my package, and when I asked him for pictures of the items and stuff I sent to him to see if he liked it, he told me he has it in a storage locker and he was going for a mission. I was worried sick, but he reminded me that I am his soulmate. He would be in touch in a few days after he completes his mission. During those days I was sick with worry. I would constantly check my phone. My husband noticed when we were in the same room or our paths crossed that I was constantly on my phone. My husband asked me if I was waiting for a pizza delivery or what was it that I kept checking my phone. I told him to mind his own business, and he became verbally abusive again, calling me names, disgusting, cruel things that are nasty, way too nasty to even mention here. I finally told him I'll get a man who will love me and want me for who I am, to which my husband berated me and told me how worthless I am. He would laugh hysterically when I would talk back and tell him I can have love. I didn't hear from Matthew, and it had been past 3 days. I was worried absolutely sick. Then, late one night, I got a call from a man named Mr. Charles. He told me Matthew had been shot during a mission, and he texted me photos of Matthew laying in a hospital bed all bloody. He said that he had surgery and was in Kabul, but needed to be airlifted back to the U.S. He said Matthew and 50 other soldiers were shot, and due to the mass amount of injured soldiers, the family or the soldiers would have to pay for their emergency flight back to America. Mr. Charles said I was listed as his emergency contact, and Matthew was unconscious but would wake up and ask for me. He said it would be a $5,000 cost to airlife flight him to America where he can receive treatment, otherwise he could die. I didn't think twice. I asked how to send the money. Mr. Charles told me I can send it via Bitcoin as the banks in Afghanistan are closed due to the war. He gave me the information and I rushed to the nearest Bitcoin machine. Mr. Charles gave me instructions on how to sign up and how to send it, as I'd never used Bitcoin before. I sent it right away, $5,000. I was crying for days before I heard from another man who said he was a doctor at a military base in North Carolina where Matthew was flown. He said they had to do emergency surgery, but Matthew would survive and be awake soon to talk to me. The next day, Matthew called me on WhatsApp. He sounded different. I thought maybe the medication and having surgery affected him, but his voice sounded deeper and rougher. I told him he didn't sound right, but he insisted he was fine. He said he loved me and would see me soon. Matthew called me a few days later, sounding more like himself. He said he was going to be in the hospital in North Carolina for at least a month, and then he was going to retire, as the military wanted to send him to South Korea. And he said he was afraid he couldn't perform his duties, but the military made him sign a contract that he would. He said they were forcing him or they would take away his retirement. I was so upset. He said that he can still get to the bank and fix his account, but that the hospital was not allowing him to get medication he needs or food to get his strength back, and he has no way to pay for it until he can get to the bank. He said he broke protocol for the military during the terrorist ambush, and it was his fault the men all got shot, and the military was no longer providing him private care. I was totally shook up and needed to help him. He asked me if I could borrow some money as his house payment was behind, and he was needing medicine and food. His phone would be shut off as well, and the bank will take his house away if he doesn't make the payment. He asked me if he could give me the number to his bank, and if I would call and find out what he owes for the house payment and any fees that are owed. I told him the bank likely won't give me that information, and he said they would, as he has me on the account as his wife. I told him to give me the info, and he gave me the bank's phone number. He told me he loved me and asked me to call the bank, as he was too weak and tired. I told him I would take care of it and to rest, and I would call him tomorrow. I called the phone number he gave me for the bank and spoke to a bank manager named Mr. Olson. He said that Matthew's mortgage payment was 2 months behind due to his funds being frozen, and he owed nearly $4,000 for the mortgage. And he said the bank will sell the home if it is not paid by Friday. Today was Wednesday. And he said that he cannot get access to his account due to it being frozen until he can physically come into the bank and verify his ID and information. The bank manager asked for my email address, and he sent me the website for the bank and Matthew's login details. He told me the payment must be made by Friday, and when I logged into his bank account, it showed he had over $700,000 in the bank on a frozen hold message across the account. I called back the bank manager and asked him how I can pay the mortgage. The bank manager said that since it's less than 48 hours before default, I would need to make the mortgage payment via Bitcoin, so it's received right away, or wire the money to a processing agent for the mortgage company. Since I knew how to do Bitcoin, I opted for that and sent the money. It was nearly $4,000. I received a payment notice via email from the bank stating his mortgage had been paid. I called Matthew and told him the good news, and he was so thankful. I also got him some iTunes cards to keep his phone going. I told him I would give him some money for food and medicine, and he told me it would have to be sent to the hospital account directly. He gave me the name of a woman in North Carolina who he said was the accounting agent for the hospital. I sent $1,500 to this woman, and he said they credited his pharmacy and food account at the hospital. Matthew told me how much he loves me, and he will pay me back in double. I told him all I want is for him to be okay and never leave me and love me forever. He told me he would, and we will marry and be together. Matthew told me my husband is wicked and that he will take care of and love me, and that I should pack my things and get ready to be with him in North Carolina. Matthew then asked me about my finances. I told him my husband and I have a joint bank account. Matthew convinced me to take the money out, and he would hold it for safekeeping. He told me that a military friend of his has an account, and that he could hold the money for us, and that I deserved all the money for being treated so badly. He said his friend could hold on to the money in his Chase account, and once Matthew had gotten out of the hospital, he could unfreeze his bank account and put it in his account, and he trusts his friend with his life to hold the money until then. He said his friend saved him from the gunfight in Afghanistan. I didn't know if it was insanity, rage, anger, both, but I started to transfer money from our joint account to this man's Chase account. Matthew would tell me his friend said it was safe. He showed me a screenshot of the Chase account as the money went in. I started to transfer cash a little at a time and then did a big transfer, actually quite a few. I packed my things, put them in storage, and told Matthew I would do one more transfer before I leave my husband for good. I transferred all of our savings and just left my husband's one unemployment check in the account to cover the mortgage. Everything else I transferred to Matthew's friend's Chase bank account. I then called Matthew and told him it was all transferred. I had packed my things into storage and packed my car, and I was driving to North Carolina and would stay at his house while he recovered, or get a hotel room near the hospital that he was at until he could come home. Matthew said I could stay at his house. He gave me the address and told me there was a key under the doormat. That day I left, my car packed on the way to North Carolina. Before I left, Matthew had asked me to stop at the store and see if I could get him a bunch of iTunes cards. I was feeling on a high just leaving my husband. I used some of the money I took from the joint account and bought him $500 worth of iTunes cards. I gave them all to Matthew, and he said I would see him soon. The last thing Matthew ever said to me was, "I love you, my queen." I arrived at Matthew's house in North Carolina and found it to be a home for sale. There was a real estate sign in the yard. I thought it was odd, but wondered if maybe something was mistaken with the sign. I looked under the doormat. There was no key. I ended up knocking on a neighbor's door, to which I spoke to a lady who said there's no military man named Matthew living there, that an elderly couple had lived there and they moved to be closer to their kids and grandkids, and the home had been for sale for about 5 months now. I double-checked the address, and I had it right. She stated no military man had ever lived there, and the couple that had lived there had been there for a long time, and she had known them for around 10 years, as she had lived in her house that long. I asked another neighbor who saw us talking, and he confirmed what the first neighbor said. I tried calling Matthew, but it would just ring and ring. It showed he had not been online. I was confused and decided to drive to the hospital where he said he was at. Much to my shock, there was no hospital at the address he gave me. It was an empty lot. In a panic, I drove to the military base where he said he was at and spoke to someone at the front gate. By this time I was in tears and wailing. I think they felt bad for me. A man came out at a distance and asked me what was going on. I explained the story to him, and I could see in his eyes he felt sad for me, or he thought I was nuts. He told me he can confirm for me there was no reports of 50 men shot in Afghanistan, and that would have made not only military news, but local and international news as well, and there are no reports to this. I couldn't believe it. I thanked him, and I left. I tried calling Matthew, and my calls wouldn't go through. My messages were unread. I tried calling the bank, and it went to Google Voice. I tried all the numbers Matthew had given me, bank numbers and everything, and they all went to Google voicemail. His profile and everything was gone off Facebook. I went to the police and explained myself. An officer told me that it sounds like I was scammed. The officer explained to me how scammers do this, and the numbers and bank transfer info was likely sent to other victims or used the scammer via Bitcoin, and it can't be traced. I wanted the police to do something. They said there's nothing they can do but file a report. I wanted them to file a missing person report on Matthew, but they said they had to inform me that he doesn't exist. It's a scam. It's a fake name and everything. The pictures are stolen. I finally accepted this, but my life was destroyed. I ended up driving back home to find my husband was able to start filing for divorce, and he changed the locks on the house. I literally lost everything, including my mind, my man, my home, and my money. I ended up staying with my sister for a while, which we'd always had a strained relationship. Since the scam, I get tons of friend requests from military profiles on Facebook. I tried to contact the woman in New York who I sent the package to, but I didn't have her number or couldn't find her Facebook profile anywhere. I wrote her a letter in the mail, but I never got a reply. The Bitcoin transfer information was useless and the cops could do nothing. My husband ended up getting the divorce once the courts opened up. I also was made to pay back the money I took from the account, as it was a joint account, and my husband told the judge I gave it all to a scammer. Once the financial part of it was settled, I did owe back money. I was given nothing. No alimony, nothing in the divorce. My husband got the last laugh. Shortly after all this was said and done, I got an email from a person I didn't know who said they have my naked pictures. He sent a couple and said if I didn't send them $10,000 in 1 week via Bitcoin, they would send them to my family and husband. I ignored the email, and 2 weeks later, my now ex-husband called me to tell me someone contacted him via LinkedIn and Facebook showing my naked photos and said his wife was a prostitute. The photos also got sent to my sister, my family, my son, and some friends I had on Facebook. I was totally destroyed and at my lowest. Of course, my ex-husband made me a laughingstock. I never found out who the scammer was, and I don't think I ever will, but listening to voice chats I've heard of other scammers, they sound a lot like Matthew did. I lost my entire life, my self-esteem, and my self-worth. I know I'm strong enough to recover, but he also destroyed me. This is my story, and how scammers use your weakness to make you do things you normally wouldn't. We'd like to thank this lady for sharing her story. If you'd like to share your story, you can reach us via Facebook at the page Scamming Scammers Action, or drop us an email, scammingscammers@gmail.com. We'll contact you, verify your story, and make it into a video. Thanks for watching. Stay safe.